Hello and welcome to the Racing News 365.com podcast, reflecting on last weekend's Japanese Grand Prix. From Racing News 365.com, my name is Nick Golding and I'm joined by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Coop, and lead editor, Ian Pox. Sam, you're getting that for every podcast. Okay, it's a trend. I've started it.
I can't wait. You have to win the award this year so that I can pay you back next year every single time.
For that reason, I'm not going to go for it. Sam, we'll start with you. Your biggest takeaway from the race, another Max win. First driver since Michael Schumacher to win the Japanese Grand Prix 3 years on the trot. For you, what were you, most surprised about the race? What's the biggest highlight for you from Suzuka?
I think the biggest highlight has got to be we had a really interesting strategy race. It was one of those ones with lots of different narratives all kind of intertwined that you only towards the end of the race got to see that start to, basically play out and where everyone would kind of end up. I thought that was fascinating. The alternate strategies was very interesting as well. And I think that's like my biggest take home was that with Mercedes, again, they've proven that there's a little bit of indecision there when it comes to strategy. I thought they were bold. I think they did the right thing and they were bold to go with the offset or the contrarian strategy. However, I think they should have split Russell and Hamilton to have both of them do the kind of one-stopper. I thought was unusual. And then we've seen it before with them, and it was masked in their years of dominance where they go so far down the road to the point of no return with a strategy, and then they try and change off it because it's not working where they really should probably commit. And I think what we saw today, I think is particularly kind of pronounced because it's contrasted against Ferrari getting strategy right today. And they're often held to a certain standard. And I think what we saw is actually Mercedes kind of occupying that kind of Ferrari space strategy wise.
It's actually a really interesting point you made, though, about Mercedes, getting to the point of no return with a strategy where when they do change, it's ultimately too late. As we kind of saw yesterday, Hamilton, stressed to Mercedes he wanted to change strategy because the one stop for them just didn't work. Ferrari and Mercedes, Ian, as we discussed yesterday in the F1 update, have done a bit of a switcheroo because Ferrari last season were the team who were excellent over one lap, but come the race had poor time management and as a result, poor race pace. This season, they've got the great strategies. They've got the great race pace. Mercedes are struggling on a strategy front. And as a result, their race pace just isn't enough to challenge, let alone the podium, the top five.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Nick. You called it spot on. It has been a complete switcheroo from what we've seen so far, particularly from Ferrari. An incredible job done by them over the course of this season, over these first four races from what we've seen. They really, really struggled, as you highlighted last season. That was one of their big bugbears last year, that they really could not get the tyres working, no matter which circuit, no matter what temperature, no matter where they were at, the conditions. And they've really clearly, under Fred Vasseur's leadership, got their heads together and managed to come out with a really solid, respectable car this season that is now quite comfortably, and I think we can say quite comfortably after a good variation of circuits over these first four Grand Prix so far, quite comfortably the best of the rest. They're edging closer towards Red Bull. That's pretty evident. We could see the gap in qualifying at Suzuka. They'd halve that. So they're still not quite there. There's still a way to go. We saw what they did in Australia. That was a good, solid performance. Yes, okay, Max had his brake issues and we were robbed of a potentially solid race there in terms of the two teams going head to head. But we came away with a Ferrari 1-2, and that was something to laud. And now we've come away from Suzuka looking at Ferrari, looking at what they did in qualifying, looking at what they've done in the Grand Prix, in particular with Charles Leclerc. That was just a monster job that he did on that first stint on the medium tyre post the red flag. Tremendous effort. Nobody else even came close to doing that. And when you consider what McLaren did at the Japanese Grand Prix last year, second and third in qualifying, second and third in the Grand Prix, looking really good on race pace. Lando Norris was the first to pit to get rid of his mediums. Charles Leclerc pretty much went and did double the amount of laps that Lando did on that first stint. So quite clearly, whatever they've done at Ferrari over the winter has paid absolutely handsome dividends, and they're giving us something most definitely to talk about other than Max Red Bull at the moment, which is great. It's what we want. Good stuff from Ferrari.
Yeah, I think you can definitely see as well that the impact that Fred Vasseur had having his first full winter with the team, because obviously last season he came in January, so he didn't really get the winter break with them. But a question to the viewers, so please let us know in the comment section, and also to you two, between now and the end of the season in 20 races time, yes, we have another 20 races. Do you
Stop
think
saying it like that? Well,
we've got another 20 races to go.
There you go. That's more like it. Come on, bit of enthusiasm.
Do you think Ferrari are going to catch Red Bull? Sam, we'll come to you first.
I think they won't this year. I think they'll close the gap. I think next year they will. And again, with Hamilton, I think there's recency bias in the kind of have they made a mistake in getting rid of Sainz? They are replacing Carlos Sainz with a 7-time world champion, the most decorated racing driver in the history of Formula One. So I think with that lineup and another winter, I think they won't be quite there at the end of the year, but I think they will be able to give Red Bull at least a test in the early stages of next season.
So why do you say that, Sam? And I ask that on the basis that, as we well know, the regulations remain stable going into next season. The teams have their budget caps that they will predominantly focus on 2026. Majority of teams have already turned around and said that they won't be updating the cars going into next season. If they do, they're going to be extremely minimal, because every single penny, every single cent, euro, dollar, whatever currency you wish to use, has got to be focused on 2026. So yes, I agree, they probably might be a bit closer than they are now at the end of this season, but why would that make them to be any closer going into next season?
Put on the spot.
I mean, it's a very good point, but I also think that the progress they'll make this year, and given the diminishing returns that Red Bull are surely going to face, or at least we keep on saying that, and then they keep on kind of moving the goalposts. But I just feel that given the progress that Ferrari could make over the year, that will almost renew and rejuvenate them. And I think they could maybe turn a little bit more attention to 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if they think, actually, we might be able to kind of make this a little bit more interesting. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's why maybe they might bring more development or take further steps than other teams who will have turned their focus to 2026.
Fair point.
Very
well made.
On the topic of, obviously, Red Bull, it was a third 1-2 of the season. Verstappen leading home Sergio Perez. But something that's very interesting after the race is, and I've got the quote, Sergio Perez in the media pin speaking to Sky Sports F1 said that I expect within a month to know what I'll be doing next year. Now, of course, we don't know what he's going to be doing, but in our opinions, Ian, for you, the fact that Sergio has put a deadline on when he believes he will know by, do you think it's a sign that actually he will be staying at Red Bull? Because even Christian Horner after the race was very, very positive of the Mexican driver.
We've been down this road before, haven't we?
Here we go.
I remember something like this occurring a couple of years or so back, and Checo emerged with a new contract out of it. And at this point in time, given his comments, given, as you've pointed, Christian's very positive remarks about Perez, all signs on that basis, you have to say, are pointing towards him staying. If that's the case, then that's a big seat ruled out for next year, and a lot of drivers will arguably feel very disappointed, not least Daniel Ricciardo, not least Yuki Tsunoda, Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso. You could potentially obviously then rule those guys out. So he's done a good job. bottom line is he's done a very solid job to start the season, and you cannot ask too much more of your number 2 driver than to finish number 2 in the Grand Prix behind your number 1 driver, as Checo has done in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and now Japan. The obvious blip was, of course, Australia.
Yeah.
He was not in a position to take advantage of Max's early brake failure and early retirement. Should have been. As we know, he had a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Nico Hulkenberg in qualifying on Saturday. And then we were told that he had to negotiate some kind of issue with his car during the Grand Prix as well. So, on that basis, 3 runners up behind 3 Max Verstappen wins. Why look elsewhere? But
so do you think then that Red Bull will opt to keep Checo, whether it's for a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, rather than sign Carlos, who is, that bit younger and is performing arguably the best he ever has in F1?
I could see somebody to answer just as I was coming to the end towards my previous answer, so I'll let him go. For me, I'd look elsewhere. I'd go for something different, just to spice things up, give it a bit of added flavour going into next season and potentially 2026. That's what I would do. I'm not the Red Bull team principal, but I can understand why, if Checo is retained on the basis of him finishing second in last year's Drivers' Championship, even though we know he didn't perform at nowhere near his best, and on the basis of, as I say, 3 runners up behind 3 Max Verstappen wins. Yeah, but not what I would do. Go, Sam.
Yeah, I have to agree. I personally would change things up, but I understand why Red Bull, especially with the last few months they've had, dealing with off-track matters and so on and so forth, why they'd want that continuity and that security of keeping their lineup the same, keeping things as consistent as they can do. What I do think is interesting with the quote, and maybe I am clutching at straws, is that he didn't say, "I know where I'll be." I think "I know what I'll be doing" is slightly different, and it suggests he has potentially other options outside Formula One. I don't know. Maybe I am just kind of reading too much into it. But I found the wording interesting. As soon as that quote was said, I thought, why didn't he say where he'll be?
I think if you go back a few years back, you'll find he probably said the same thing as well. I remember that kind of phrase coming. Yeah,
potentially it's just that.
I like it. It's a topic for discussion. I like it, Sam. It's a good point.
Come to Formula E, Sergio. Come on. But so, if you both think that Red Bull should look elsewhere than Checo, for you, okay, 2 questions then. For you personally, who do you think they should go for? And if you are Max, who do you think he would want? Also, people watching, let us know in the comments. I think it's a really interesting topic, because so much of silly season now is going to depend around what do Red Bull do. Especially if they do, for example, get Carlos, then that's one less option for Mercedes.
So that's almost like a heart versus head question, isn't it? Who would you like to see in the seat, and who do you think they should really go for?
Yeah.
Who would I like to see in the seat? Well, Lewis has gone to Ferrari, so that's out the window. So next best for me, Fernando. Give him 1 year. Sorry, Sam. I've beaten Sam to the punch.
It's funny you say that, though.
It's
really
funny. I love it.
But it's funny you say that, because actually, ahead of the weekend, Max spoke about the rumours linking Fernando to Red Bull and how he wouldn't understand why they would sign him, given that Red Bull's tradition is going down the younger route, a tradition they actually broke by signing Perez. For you, Sam, come on, head or heart?
My heart is with Fernando. I think it would just be so exciting to have someone who would be a much closer match of the drivers available, the closest match to Max, over a lap, over a race distance. So I think Fernando would be the exciting choice with your heart. I think the other option is Carlos, obviously, but I still don't think that's the choosing with your head option. And it certainly, I don't think, is what Max would want, given it's ancient history now, but you can just imagine the narratives that media types like us would kind of lean on in kind of seeing if there is any friction there. So I think that realistically, I think for Max, he would want Daniel or Yuki. Daniel's not doing enough. Yuki is outperforming him. But even then, is Yuki performing to a level and Sergio performing down to a level where you'd make that change? I can't see how you would.
It's remarkable, isn't it, guys, how quickly the narrative has changed.
Yeah.
Coming into this season, we were talking about Daniel Ricciardo potentially being, front runner to go to Red Bull next season. Daniel himself had made no secret of the fact, both at the back end of last season and coming into the season, that that's what he was targeting. And all of a sudden, after four very dismal Grand Prix for him, for very different reasons, he's now pretty much at the back of a long line of drivers wanting to get that second seat at Red Bull. As I say, it just goes to show how quickly things can change.
Before discussing Ricciardo, for those who are watching, waiting for us to announce the winners of the prize giveaway, the draw has been made and we'll be announcing the winners at the end of the podcast. Going back to Ricciardo, of course, he had an unfortunate crash with Alex Albon on the opening lap of the Japanese Grand Prix, judged as a racing incident, something that myself and Ian thought was fair. Sam, would you on board the racing incident was the right verdict?
Absolutely. I think the Stewards got it spot on in their wording, that essentially saying that had it not been the first lap, we would have viewed it very differently. But because it is the first lap and it's you're in the melee, the chaos of it, I think it is a racing incident. I think it's a narrow part of the circuit. He was obviously very much distracted by Lance, who he anticipated was going to basically take the apex at turn 3. So you can understand how it's happened from Daniel's perspective.
It was actually quite in a weird way a positive weekend for Daniel, given that he missed FP1, effectively missed FP2 because it was a meaningless session with the damp but not damp enough conditions. He is receiving obviously a new chassis for the Chinese Grand Prix. With that in mind, we've obviously heard the rumours that he's only got a certain number of races to save his career. How long, Ian, do you think Daniel has to save not only his F1 career, but actually to still keep himself in that shop window for Red Bull?
If you believe the rumours that were being aired just a couple of weeks back, he's got this Chinese Grand Prix, and then that might be it. I mean, that was going to be a real acid test for him. It's very much going to be a level playing field with Yuki as well. You got to, respect the fact that that was Yuki's home turf this weekend, or just gone. And to finish, and I'll use the exact time again, 0.055 seconds off of out-qualifying Yuki, I think was a really solid performance from Daniel. One we know he beat himself up over. We heard his post-qualifying radio message. We know he's a confidence guy. We discussed that in the past as well. But Suzuka, that was Yuki's home patch. So for me, Daniel did a reasonable job. Good job. So that's why I say Shanghai now is a level playing field for both those guys. One practice session straight into qualifying, or sprint qualifying. And then sprint qualifying, let me get the order right. Is that right?
Yeah, so FP1, sprint quali, sprint normal quali, race.
That's it.
It has changed for this season. It's going to take some getting used to.
Yeah.
But actually,
so
it's funny.
Go on, Nick.
No, it's funny you mentioned actually the Chinese Grand Prix being a sprint weekend. This is something we'll discuss in more detail in next week's podcast. But during the Japanese Grand Prix, the Chinese Grand Prix was discussed quite a lot. And the fact that the next round is a sprint one, and the first time we've been there since 2019, there was a lot of criticism towards the organisers for making China a sprint race.
I personally like the kind of the test of it. It's a new era of regulations, so these cars have never been run around that circuit. You've got an hour. Not half the grid, but a fair number of the drivers haven't ever raced there, or at least raced in F1 there. So it is going to really kind of be a separator between who can get on top of things within an hour and who can't. Daniel showed this weekend that he can. So, he had obviously a promising qualifying session following FP3. but he's going into a session, an hour in practice, against a teammate who's never raced there, as far as I know, certainly not in
Never,
F1.
which is crazy when you think about it.
Exactly. So really, you're looking at the drivers like Ricciardo, the ones with experience of the circuit, to be able to lean on that knowledge and that experience. But also, by himself placing an emphasis on this new chassis, he's further bringing pressure on himself. If he can't get on top of things and he can't continue to blame the chassis, people in the team are going to be looking around going, well, we've provided what he asked of us in replacing that, and he still hasn't taken that step forward that we'd expect. And yeah, if Yuki's got the better of him, it's not going to look good on Daniel next weekend. So it's in China. So it is a big weekend for him. Absolutely.
Do you both think Daniel will still be there coming into the season?
Yeah. I do.
I don't think they'd make the change. I think if it was someone else, maybe, but it's Daniel Ricciardo. I don't think they'd make that change.
Yeah, I'll be very surprised, actually. I really would. We know Red Bull, we know, used all three names, Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, RB, or RB as they are now. We know previously Toro Rosso and AlphaTauri have changed the drivers mid-season. So look what they did last year, AlphaTauri. They got rid of De Vries after 10 Grand Prix, brought in Daniel. So yes, they have history. They could easily go and do it again. Will they? I don't think so. I genuinely don't think so. As I say, I think that performance from Daniel in Suzuka qualifying for me showed that he's got a little bit of the mojo back. It would have been great to have seen what he could have done over the course of that Grand Prix. Sadly, we were robbed of that opportunity. So now, as I say, this, and Sam's used the word, it's a leveler. It's a level playing field. Yuki's never raced there. And Daniel's not raced there for 5 years. So acknowledge the fact, Sam, that you talked about Daniel's knowledge of the circuit. The only knowledge he's really got is of the layout, because completely different race car from 5 years ago, 6 years ago that he would have used compared to what he's going to be racing in just under 2 weeks' time. So in terms of that level playing field, this is going to be it. We're now going to see these two guys go properly head to head, and who is the better two out of them, in my book.
Well, considering that our predictions so far this season have been the definition of commentator's curse, you can probably expect Ricciardo's going to be dropped by the summer. Let's move on to Fernando Alonso. We spoke about him briefly earlier, and you guys would both like to see him alongside Max at Red Bull. Alonso is delivering once again this season for Aston Martin. He spoke after the Japanese Grand Prix that was in the top 5 of his best weekend performances of his career. Fernando's excelling. Lance is struggling. With Lance in the team, do you think his father's wish of Aston Martin becoming world champions is ever going to happen?
Hopefully Lance Stroll isn't listening to this, because I get on well with him, and I've done a few interviews with him in the past. No, is the short answer, unfortunately. I mean, look at what happened in that Japanese Grand Prix over the course of the weekend. Look where Fernando put that car. Look where Lance put that car on the grid. And then you look across the Grand Prix as well. Fernando again doing a stellar job throughout the race. And there was a wonderful little clip, wasn't there, of
the best bit of the Grand Prix, in my opinion.
Probably one of the highlights of the Grand Prix, actually.
Of the season so far.
Probably definitely the season so far. Lance pretty much almost breaking down. Certainly his voice was cracking when he was going on about the fact that his car was in... the fact his car was... What was the exact phrase, Nick?
Basically saying that in a straight line, it was like he was in a different category.
Different category, that's it. In a different category.
Which is bold.
It's almost
He's learning from Fernando.
He's learning from Fernando. I was just about to point that out.
He's learned from the best.
So he's learning. Yeah.
He is. Exactly the same circuit. F2. That was what Fernando said about the old McLaren that he was in back in those days. F2 engine, was it? Or something along those lines?
Yeah.
Was it GP2?
I
don't think F2 was a thing. I think it was GP2.
It was GP2.
Going back a little while.
GP2 engine. That was about a Honda engine, and obviously they're going to be partnering with Honda. So
I know.
Slightly different side of it. But
You're throwing the curveballs today, Sam.
But just getting back to Lance, jeez. In my book, it's about time Lawrence decided what was really for the benefit of the team overall, and said to his son, look, we've given it a good few years. You know, I've built up this team. I've tried to help you as much as I could. It's really not working, and it's time to start a different chapter of this team's history. And unfortunately, that will not be, or that will be without you. Whether he will ever say those words to him, I don't know. Obviously, I can't call what's going on in Lawrence's head, but for me, as a professional Formula One journalist, looking on at the sport as I have done for these many years now, you need two drivers working together pretty much as you can get them on an even keel. And let's face it, Fernando's up here, Lance is down here. And that's the way it will continue to be while Lance is in that team. I don't think that the Aston Martin team will ever be good enough, sadly, while Lance is still there.
With that in mind, Sam, thinking hypothetically, let's say end of this season, Lance either moves team or moves away from F1. Let's say Fernando was alongside Carlos Sainz, Aston Martin. If they had two drivers of a good caliber, what are Aston Martin currently capable of, do you think?
Currently, it's difficult because I don't think they're quite there with McLaren in terms of performance. But that is, I think, where they can start to challenge with a more even lineup. It's difficult. They do need to improve the car for that to happen. I think they are in that kind of no man's land with Mercedes at the moment. Certainly beating Mercedes should be the expectation with a more even lineup, given that Mercedes kind of, they talk about improving all the time and it just doesn't quite seem to be happening. So they have fundamentally, it seems, Mercedes have misunderstood and still haven't quite got to grips with this era of regulations. So I think really it's consolidating a P4, which they should have done last year. And again, they lost out because they didn't have a strong enough lineup across both drivers.
And arguably pushing McLaren for P3 at this current. As you said, currently, where are they going to be? Where could they be? Currently, yes, they could definitely be pushing McLaren for P3 if they had two drivers of a relatively equal caliber, as we just discussed.
Final topic before announcing the giveaway winners, Williams. Now, in Japan, their season, they're downwards. I don't want to call it a downward spiral, but it's just their bad luck continued because the Albon was part of that crash with Ricciardo, and then Sargent, who was having a good race, went off at turn 9 towards the end. I mean, I don't know what to even say about Williams at this point. We know they've got the ability, particularly through Albon, to be scoring, some points, but I can't think of a team who've had this much bad luck at such an early part of the season. Ian, coming to you first.
I'm just going to introduce a special guest star, otherwise she'll carry on meowing if I don't pick her up, so hold on.
Special guest, here we go. Oh, wow. The new podcast guest.
That was one of my two cats, folks. She's called Lily. And as I said, she would have just carried on meowing if I hadn't picked her up, and you just got the meow in the background. So there we go. Sorry, mate. What was the question?
Williams. I mean,
yes.
Have you known a team to have this much bad luck to start a season?
Over the course of my history, I'm struggling to remember something like this. Just terrible run of events. And as you and I discussed in the update as well, post Grand Prix, Nick, it could potentially leave them in serious trouble going into the Chinese Grand Prix. Now, we do not know the state of that chassis.
Yeah.
We were made aware by team principal James Vowles that the team would be unable to bring a spare until the Miami Grand Prix. If this chassis is cracked as well, potentially that could leave them with the possibility of running only one car in China because they won't have that spare. Whether they can do a rush job and either A, get this one repaired, or B, suddenly find the wherewithal to get that spare to China. But that is a hellishly difficult job. So they're in a real pickle. The money it's costing them as well.
Well, yeah, and that's the worrying point.
That's another big worrying point. It's eating into every ounce of their budget that they have. That's going to have a massive carry-on effect for whatever they're going to do next year, potentially even with regard to 2026 as well at this stage. They carry on having these crashes over the course of the, as we've pointed out, 20 Grand Prix still to go. These are worrying times for Williams, worrying times for James Vowles. We came out of Australia saying the team couldn't afford another crash. Bloody hell, they're going to have two.
Well, and that's the good point as well. That actually
almost three.
The
repaired chassis that was given to Logan, he then went and put in the wall in what was quite a big impact in FP1.
Fortunately, that didn't suffer any damage. Yes, they had to replace parts, but now we've got this incident. If this one is cracked as well, can they repair it? Have they got the time? Just feel for James, because he's since he's come in, he's been such a breath of fresh air for that team.
Yeah.
In many respects, what he has done to turn a really ailing Mark around in such a short period of time, to go from finishing 10th 4 seasons out of 5 to finishing 7th last year. Tremendous job. And he, given what he's done, and that team, given what they've done, do not deserve the start that they've had to this season. You can only hope things can only get better. Surely it can't get any worse. The only way is up, guys. Come on.
Sam, any closing thoughts on Williams?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is that it's coming from both sides of their driver lineup as well, these mistakes. Yeah. And today, the best of Logan Sargent as well as the worst of Logan Sargent. He had a really strong first half of the race, was putting good moves, was making that offset strategy work where the likes of Alpine and Mercedes were struggling to get the best out of it. So that was very promising, but the poor pit stop and then the mistake just left him in no man's land, and that's really disappointing because he was in that position where he could have picked up points if there was something that happened ahead of him. And you're looking at a team lead in Albon who is making mistakes. Yeah, maybe he was unlucky today, wrong place, wrong time. But it's when it's coming from both sides of the lineup for their fault or not, it's really difficult to actually get a footing. And as Ian said, it's going to hinder their development, and that is ultimately going to have this kind of long tail to where they are at the moment. Yeah, no,
hang on. I mean, shall we end this podcast on a positive note by announcing the giveaway winners? Do we get a little drum roll?
Yep.
The winners of the racenews365.com merchandise giveaway are Ed Reagan and Hannah Dindorf. If I've said your names wrong, I'm really sorry. I'm terrible at pronunciations, but you are the winners. Congratulations. To collect for us to deliver your prizes, please contact this email address, which will be somewhere on the screen. So I'm going to wash the windows. We will then make sure it is you. So if anyone who hasn't won thinks, okay, I'll email Race News 365, say that it was me, we will find out. Okay. So Ed and Hannah, congratulations. Please get in contact with us and we will deliver your prizes. From myself, Ian and Sam, we will see you next time. This has been Racing News 365. Bye.